Hello everybody, welcome back to a video, and today I'm going to be ranking all 6 Scream movies. So, before I get started, I do want to say, even the weakest movie in the series, I think it still has a few good aspects to it. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, Scream 2 is my number 6. It is the weakest movie in the series. Still has good aspects. I like how we follow the characters into this point, a year after the events of the previous movie. I also think this is the movie in which Courtney Cox gives her best performance as Gale, or it's the movie where she's the most interesting as Gale. And Mickey is a very interesting secondary ghost face. I think this is where Dewey really becomes a great character. He was already really good in Scream 1, but I think this is where he gets really good. Neve Campbell's stuff is pretty good as well. But let's talk about the big elephants in the room. That infamous musical number is not great. And if you watched my Ghostface ranking, the outdated one, the update will be coming soon. Well, I'm not a big fan of the Mrs. Loomis twist. It is, oh boy, I'm not a big fan of that twist. Okay, apart from that, the decision to keep Cotton Weary involved was actually really good. And so, yeah, just, there's some really good aspects to this movie, but ultimately, it is the weakest one. Okay, so number 5 is Scream 4. Very good aspects to this movie. Some really good aspects being the new characters. Kirby is one of my favorite characters in the series because of this movie and her return in Scream 6. And also Jill, who was, if you watched my Ghostface ranking, the pre-Scream 6 one I'd recorded a while ago, then you know that in that list I rated Jill very highly. I don't know, it's just, I don't know, something about this one doesn't click as much as the other ones. It's very good. Maybe it's the fact this is the weakest outing for the OGs. But ultimately, it's good. There are good aspects to this movie. But I don't know. There's just something that's saying it's not as good as the rest. So, yeah, it stays at number 5. Number 4 is Scream 2022. There are very good aspects about this movie, actually. Yeah, it stinks that Dewey is killed. But, up until that point, this might be the most David Arquette gets for his role as Dewey. And I mean, this movie is making fun of legacy sequels such as The Force Awakens, so it would only make sense to have one of the OGs get killed in this movie. But why was it Dewey? That is the only reason this movie doesn't get into the top half, is this is the movie that ends my favorite character. Oh boy. I think this movie has actually gotten better since I watched Scream 6, which I'll get to later. Very good aspects about this one. And the new characters introduced, some of them are better than other ones. I think the highlights for the highlight of the new characters in this movie was probably Chad, and not his sister is not a highlight. I'm actually not a very big fan of her. Probably Sam and Tara were the other highlights for the new characters. The Ghostface reveal is slightly divisive in my family, because in this movie in general, because my sister has said the exact quote was, "This is the dumbest movie in the series." I mean, okay, yeah, there are some dumb decisions made, but ultimately, I like how this movie connects itself to the past and is ultimately very good in a lot of places. that's really all I have to say about Scream 2022. Number 3 is Scream 3. This one has gone through my head numerous times. Where does it go? For a while, this was my favorite movie in the series, and it is very underrated. The idea of there just being one Ghostface is really good. Does it make it a little harder to believe? Yes. Also, I think this might be where Neve Campbell gives her best performance. She's not in here a lot, but what she does give is very good. And that's okay. So apart from that, yeah, this one is slightly more comedic, but I'm not a big horror guy. Actually, I like the Scream movies. I've watched the Final Destinations, and those were good. And that first Halloween is not great. So I love comedy, and I definitely like the more comedic ideas of this movie. Um, Plus, I love the idea of the third one tackling trilogies because I just love final chapters. So I wouldn't have been disappointed if this was the end of the road for the series. But ultimately, it does get beaten out by 2 movies. And the next one is probably going to be the most controversial placement. Number 2 is the original, Scream 1996. Okay, so yes, this movie is very good. From its iconic opening to just Billy and Stu in general. Sidney Prescott, one of the other time I'd say Neve Campbell is on top form as Sidney is in this movie, probably. And Gale is probably out of the survivors the weakest one. Randy is a very interesting character. This movie is mainly a character drama with a few gruesome, okay, not gruesome, but a few deaths throughout. It's a murder mystery, which makes us, you could call it extreme Clue. That's how I've described it to a few people, is this movie is extreme Clue. But ultimately, right, the 2-killer reveal is very good, but unfortunately, if you watch... So, one thing about this movie is every time I watch this movie, my appreciation for the character of Billy Loomis sinks, while the enjoyment factor of Stu rises. If that makes sense. I've watched this movie a few times, and unfortunately, Billy gets less interesting each time. Now, what I said in that initial Ghostface ranking is true. He's very memorable once he takes off the mask. Not literally, because no one actually does that until Mickey in Scream 2. But when I watch this movie, I'm not anticipating Skeet Ulrich's crazy mode. I'm anticipating Matthew Lillard's extreme crazy mode, if that makes any sense. I do like a lot of the action in this movie, and yeah, it's just really good. But that does mean, yeah, at this point, if you kept track, you know what my number 1 is. My number 1 pick is the newest one, Scream 6. Probably controversial, and I've only seen this movie once, but it was so great that first time. I loved the experience of watching this movie. That opening scene, once that Ghostface, after the Ghostface killed Laura Crane, the opening kill, it lingers and thinking, what's going on? Why aren't we going? And then you see it. You see the Ghostface take off their mask. And I was like, what is happening in this movie? And then you see that Ghostface get attacked by a different one. And I was actually thinking that I wanted to do a video on my thoughts, but I ultimately didn't get around to doing it. But I really, really wanted a warring Ghostfaces. I wanted Ghostfaces that had different interests hunting down each other. I actually thought there would be gangs of Ghostfaces attacking each other, and all the kills would actually be other Ghostfaces. That didn't happen, but this movie also did have the first time there were 3 killers, and I am just still in shock that they actually did the 3 killers. That was my biggest prediction, apart from one other one, which was Gale's death. Going into this movie, there would be 3 killers. And speaking of Gale, that phone call might be my favorite sequence in maybe any movie in the series. It is very, very intense, very exciting, and genuinely making you fear for Gale. This is one of the few times that I have actually been like, yes, oh no, run, while actually watching a movie. Maybe it's the actual experience of sitting down at the theater to watch it, or maybe it's just the movie itself. But for right now, and yes, I do believe this movie significantly improves upon the Mrs. Loomis twist. This movie, Scream 6, is the number 1 best movie in the series. Okay, so I know that was probably going to be a little controversial because a lot of people would say Scream 1 is the best. In fact, actually, I've checked other people's rankings, and I think this is actually the first one I can find that actually places one of the sequels above the original. I didn't do that just to be different, by the way. This is my honest opinion, is that this movie is the best one in the series. It is really good. And I would highly recommend you checking it out at the movies. But yeah, that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.